I wonder how many of you have ever had the experience that you walk into a restaurant or you're in a grocery store, you're somewhere, and you see someone that you haven't seen in a long time. But when you see them, you're just almost taken back. You're a little bit in shock because you're thinking to yourself, I thought he was dead. I thought she died. Now, some of you may even say it to them. You're so shocked. But we get confused whether or not someone's alive. One of the funny things with my grandmother that my dad used to always like to razz her about is we'd be at Sunday lunch at her house, and somebody'd say something about this week I went to such and such's funeral, and she would always just as quickly, when they'd say been to so-and-so's funeral, she'd say, oh, did he die? My dad would say, no, he didn't die. We just had the funeral, you know. Of course he died. Why else would it be at the funeral? One man, they published in the local newspaper in the obituary column by mistake. They published his obituary, said he had passed away. He called the editor of the newspaper and just chewed him out, was ugly about it, and said, you ought to have more, you ought to check your sources better than this, and just read him the riot act up and down and back again. And he said, I demand that you print an apology. So the next morning, front page of the paper, the editor put on there, said, I regret to announce to you that Sam is not dead. I apologize for that. But have you ever seen anyone that you thought, I bet you have. Some years ago, I actually moved to the Dallas area, to the Northside Church, many, many years ago, but I moved there as a young preacher and as a single preacher. And that's where I met my wife. I was her preacher for a few years. So we came in, but Karen and I started dating and going out. And one night we had a date on a Friday night. And I showed up to pick her up. And when she got in the car, she asked the obvious question. She said, where are we going to go? And that's where this evening started falling apart, I got to tell you. I said, well, we're going to drive down to South Dallas to a funeral home. Need to go to a funeral home. She said, a funeral home? Thought we was going on a date. I said, we are. We are, but we're going to go to the funeral home first. That's what better way to start a date, you know. We're going there first. But what had happened was a distant relative of a family member there in the congregation had passed away, and they had called and asked if I could come by and visit with the family. And I said, we're going to go by and do that first. I'd been preaching for a good many years, so I was used to this. Karen she hadn't been broke in yet on this type of a setting. I remember we got to the funeral home. We went into a small stateroom they had, as these things are. And the family was there. They had several couches in there. And we sat down and we were visiting. And the coffin was there, and the fellow was in his coffin. It was open. And we were visiting. Later, Karen said, why do you do that? Why you won't just sit right there? Won't you go out somewhere else and visit? Why would you just sit there when the body is laying right there? I said, well, that's why you're here. But I noticed while we were visiting, I got involved with the family, but I glanced over at her, and I could see that her eyes were glued to the corpse laying in the coffin. And she was looking a little bit pale. So I thought, well, maybe I need to wind this up and get out. So we got to the car, and just the doors weren't closed till she looked at me with both eyes this big around, and she said, I was watching, and said, that man moved. She said, in fact, he didn't just move once, he moved several times. I said, honey, you are imagining that. He's been embalmed. He didn't move. She said, imagination or not, embalming or not, this is the sorriest date I have ever been on in my life. But she announced, he moved. He moved. That wasn't the first time I had seen that look in somebody. Years earlier, I had conducted a funeral for a gentleman in a very small funeral home, and it was in the summertime. And it was hot, and it was muggy in there, and it was tight quarters. And as I was doing the service, I noticed, as you look into the crowd, I noticed the 6 pallbearers sitting there. And I noticed that one of them in particular, and this is something you see a whole lot at funerals, number one, he wasn't used to the suit he was wearing and the necktie. You can always tell when a guy this is not his normal attire, because he's afraid to move because it looks like he'll break if he moves. And so this whole occasion was making him uncomfortable, but it was an open casket funeral. And he was sitting there, and like Karen was, his eyes were glued to the body. And he looked scared to death. It was hot in there. And it was so hot that the pallbearer sitting next to him passed out from the heat. And when he passed out, he fell over. I'm looking as though they were right here in front. He fell over on this young man that was scared to death. And when he did, that young man jumped up. And when he jumped up, he announced, he's alive. He's alive. He's getting out of the box. I never knew how he got out of the room. But when we finally got order restored and I could go back to the funeral, we had 5 pallbearers. He was gone. And we finished that service and went to the cemetery with 5 pallbearers. Never saw him again. Now you say, what's all this got to do with anything? You're connecting the dots. You are. How do you feel? Have you ever had that experience? I bet you have. Somewhere, sometime or another. You thought somebody was dead and you saw them in the grocery store. Or maybe you're at a funeral and you are uncomfortable and you're watching the person, the body, and you think you see it move. He's alive. He's alive. That's what happened on that first day of the week following the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. He's alive. He's alive. And what made that so impressive and what made that such an exciting moment and such in some ways a horrifying moment, some ways an exuberant moment, was because they had seen him dead. They'd seen him dead. It wasn't like what we're singing this morning. And we've sang songs about the resurrection and Jesus lives and he's risen and up from the grave he arose. We sing that and we are conscious of it, but we don't experience it like they experienced it. We've glazed over it. We've made it more palatable to where we can deal with it, to where we can accept it. But these folks saw him dead. Mary, his mother, she was standing at the cross. She could see that day the nails. She could hear the pounding of the nails into the wood, into the cross. She could hear Jesus' last words, those words that many times we'll have sermon series, good thing to look at. Jesus sayings on the cross, the things that he had to say, the last words that he uttered. She watched, she experienced, she saw the brutal treatment they gave him. She was there when the soldier took the sword, the spear, and speared his side. She saw the blood as it flowed. Jesus, as he hung on the cross, Mary, his mother gave birth to him in the manger. She watched as her firstborn son died an agonizing death. She saw it. She knew he was dead. But it wasn't just Mary. There were others that were there. John chapter 19, you heard a reading of John 20 a moment ago, but John chapter 19 says there was a disciple whom Jesus loved. We take that to be John. Most believe, most scholars agree that that's John. But the disciple whom Jesus loved, he was standing there. And Jesus rallied himself. He's about to die, but he got a surge of energy. And he rallied himself and he said to this disciple that he loved, "Son, behold your mother. Mother, behold your son." This was signifying the passing of the torch, if you please, from Jesus as he is providing for his mother probably. We don't know for sure what happened to Joseph, his earthly father, the carpenter, but most think Joseph probably died when Jesus was young, because it seems that Jesus has taken over the carpenter shop in Nazareth when he begins his ministry. We just don't read anything else of Joseph, but probably, and I say probably because we don't know for sure, but probably Joseph's not in the picture at this point. And so Jesus is worried about his mother, and he passes the torch of that caring for her to the disciple that he loved, John. "Son, behold your mother. Mother, behold your son." John was standing there. John knew, there was no doubt. He watched Jesus die. Watched him die. There were people who were not there, but they became a part of it. Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, he came to Pilate after Jesus had died, and he asked, he said, "Can I have the body of Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," it said on the sign on his cross. Jews didn't like that. They asked Pilate, said, "Change that, make it read Jesus who claimed to be the King of the Jews." Pilate said, "I've written what I've written. It will stand the way I have written it." Joseph of Arimathea came to Pilate and said, "Can I have possession of the body? I've got a brand new tomb, got a brand new grave, burial spot that has not been used. And I'm going to donate that. I'm going to give that. I'm going to provide that for the burial of Jesus." Pilate said, "Okay," and the body was released to Joseph of Arimathea. And Nicodemus, that interesting fellow who came to Jesus in John chapter 3, came by night to see Jesus. It's not night anymore. He's not slipping around about it anymore. He helps Joseph of Arimathea, and they take Jesus to the tomb, and they prepare his body. They provide and they apply the spices and the burial preparations and the burial garb, the burial clothes for Jesus. Here are two men that were there when others later would say, "We're not sure he was dead." Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus had to be able to say, "He was dead. We prepared the body. We were there. We know. There's no doubt. He was dead." Then you have others that came along, more than what we'll mention tonight, or this morning, but it was a very meaningful time. Very meaningful. He was dead. It wasn't beautiful. We've glorified it to a degree. We've made it aesthetic, though we can handle it. There was nothing beautiful about it. He died an agonizing death. It wasn't only agonizing, it was shameful. That was the execution. That was the mode of execution of the day. You know, we've got crosses. We put them on top of communion sets, and we put them on buildings, and we wear them around our necks. And that's okay. I'm not saying that's wrong. That helps us remember to a degree. But we've made them pretty. Wasn't pretty. Can you imagine putting a little a silver electric chair on a chain and saying, I'm going to wear that around my neck? Somebody says, what is that? Oh, it's an electric chair. Why would you wear that? That's what the cross was. It was the gas chamber. It was the most agonizing way to kill somebody, to execute somebody. We've taken that event, as I say, with time, and we've reduced it to a little story. We put it in a book. We put it in a book that's a Bible, and it's covered with leather, and it's old. And it's become, to some degree, a once upon a time. This thing happened. It was real. It was so real. A grim story. But that grim story helps us understand today when we look at our experiences and we catalog them and we feel them. It helps us understand what happens next when we think about the fact that Jesus was dead, and it was a dead body that Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea took to that tomb. But yet, he was alive. Yet, when the time went on and a few days went by, he was alive. Remember, Mary Magdalene, she goes to the tomb of Jesus early in the morning. She gets to the tomb. The big stone has been rolled away, the stone which sealed the tomb off. She goes inside. Nothing's there but the grave clothes, the burial clothes. And they've been neatly folded and laid there. You say, what's the significance of that? Jesus was through with them. He was done with them. I don't know about you, but if I get an opportunity, I don't usually get to on Sundays because Sundays are such a busy day. But if you're going to have a nap today and you go home and you take off your church clothes, but you're going to put them back on tonight, you probably don't fold them and hang them up and put them back just right. You say, the women's saying, well, they never do put them up. What are you talking about? What's new about that? You only do that if you're not going to put it back on. You have no use for it again. Not going to be wearing this again. Why? He's been raised. He's been resurrected. And Mary Magdalene goes in, and all she finds are neatly folded burial garments, minus the body. Minus the body. When she sees someone, she asks the question. She says, where have you taken my Lord? What have you done with him? Where have you laid him? I'll go and I'll get him. She sees a gardener standing there. Thinks he's the gardener. Has to be the gardener. Who else would be out here in the garden, in the cemetery, this early of a morning? Sees him standing there. And she goes and asks him, where have you put him? Jesus answers, Mary. Mary. She realizes it's the Lord. She realizes it's Jesus. And when she realizes it, she does the normal thing, the normal reaction. She reaches out and she grabs him. She wants to touch him. And she clings to him. Now I know the King James Version says that Jesus said, don't touch me. And that's true. But that's not exactly what's being said there. If you look at the Greek on it and you do a word study on that, that's not exactly the way it comes out. Jesus is not saying, don't touch me because I'm fragile. Don't touch me because you oughtn't to be putting your hands on me. What he's saying is, don't hang on to me. Don't cling to me. This is not the end. Don't think this is all that there is. Don't cling to me. There's more that's going to take place. I'm going away, but there's a whole lot that's going to come out of that. She sees that Jesus is alive. She goes running back to find the disciples. She sees Peter, and she tells him, she says, Peter, he's not there. What do you mean he's not there? Jesus, he's not there. I've been to the grave. I went to the tomb, and it's empty. He's not there. Oh, Mary, you must have gone to the wrong cemetery. You must have gone to the wrong cave. No, she said. He's not there. I saw him. I touched him. He talked to me. She says, he's been resurrected. We sang it a while ago. Up from the grave. He arose. He's not there. The women tell it. Luke describes it in Luke chapter 24. When they went and said, Jesus is alive, I've touched him, I've seen him. They thought, oh, this is some more of this idle woman talk. Can't be. They wouldn't believe it. Thomas wouldn't believe it. You heard that read a moment ago. The disciples, Jesus appeared to the disciples. Thomas wasn't there. I don't know where Thomas was. I got a sermon I preached on that one time. You never know what you're going to miss when you don't go to church. Thomas laid out. He didn't go. He wasn't with them when they met. And Jesus appeared that time. He was there. So they told him, Thomas, we've seen him. He was here. He said, I will not believe it. I won't believe it till I can put my hands in the nail holes. We get down on Thomas on that. Call him Doubting Thomas. But if you read the passage real closely, the others wouldn't believe either. They'd already touched him. When Jesus met with them, he told them to touch him. They'd already done what Thomas said, I've got to do. But anyway, Thomas missed it. I don't know what he was doing. I don't know where he was. But they told him, they said, we saw him. So, Jesus appears to Thomas. Comes back. Thomas is there. And Thomas made that famous statement, unless I can touch the nail holes, I'm not believing. We say, well, they ought to have done better than that. With all the events and all the things that Jesus had told them and done with them and shown them, all the miracles they'd seen. He walks on water. He heals the sick. He makes the lame to walk, the blind to see. He can feed 5,000 people with very little bread and very few fish. We say, why would they be this way? Why would they doubt this? Why would they struggle with this so much? Folks, what I'm trying to explain to you this morning, trying to paint for you, he was dead. He was dead. Like we see someone that we know, we don't wonder, we don't question, they had put the burial spices on him. Nicodemus and Joseph knew he was dead. Mary, John, others watched the nails go in his hands, watched the blood flow from his side. They knew he was dead. That's why they struggled with it. How do you feel when you're sitting at a funeral and you think you've seen a body move? Or you meet somebody in the grocery store on the next aisle and you thought you had read or heard they had died, and now they're trying to figure out which package of cookies looks the best to them. How do you feel? We're a little bit tough on them sometimes. We say, I don't understand why they couldn't understand that. Well, it's because it's not a fairy tale. It's not a once upon a time. It's not a dream. It's not a myth. It's the story of what happened. It's a historical display and record of what really, really happened. They saw him die. They touched him after he came back to life. Those who knew him the best. But now they're able to say, he's alive. He's risen. First they couldn't believe it. But then there was this rejoicing. They were exuberant because their Savior had risen. They went out. They were persecuted after this. Jesus ascended to heaven. They were persecuted. Death came to some of them. Shame came to a lot of them. But they always kept plowing ahead. Why? Why? Because Jesus is alive. He's not dead. Not anymore. He's alive. We saw him. We know it. No warping of the mind here. What happened, happened. What they saw, what they touched, what they felt, what they heard, what they've told us, they took it and they lived it because he did rise. It's a wonderful time. It's a wonderful event. We've covered it up a bit, as I've already said. We've glossed over it and got it to a point where we can stand it. But the grimness is, the tragicness of it is, Jesus really did die. And you and I are going to die someday. That will happen. Hebrew writer said it's appointed unto every person, every man, every woman, every child. It's appointed unto all of us that one day we're going to die. That is an appointment you will not miss. You may say, I've got all these appointments. Seems like the older we get, we have more doctor's appointments. My dad, bless his heart, in his last years, he told me one day, he said, if I have any more doctors that want to see me, some of them will just have to see me at night. He said, I can't get to all these appointments. We miss a lot of appointments sometimes. We forget. The one the Hebrew writer describes, that's an appointment you will not miss. You won't miss it. I won't either. It's appointed unto every one of us that we are going to die. But Paul would say, because he lives, because Jesus lives, because he was resurrected, we can live. Because he was resurrected, we can be resurrected. Paul even describes that when he talks about baptism. He says, do you not remember what happened when you were baptized? These are the folks who have already been baptized. He said, do you remember what occurred? Like Jesus died and was buried and was raised up, we too can die to ourselves. That's repentance. That's saying we're sorry. That's saying we were wrong. That's saying we have sinned. That's saying I want to do better. That's acknowledging guilt. He said we die to ourselves. And when we're good and dead, baptism won't do much good without repentance. But when we're good and dead, we're buried in the watery grave of baptism, we like to say. Our sins are washed away. We come into contact with the atoning blood of Jesus Christ, but it doesn't stop there. It doesn't end at the baptistry. We are raised up like he was raised up. We are raised up. Why? To walk a new life. To walk a new way. To walk a new direction. To be one of his. This morning, my friend, you can do that. If you've never done that, if you're here and you've never done that, why not use today, this auspicious occasion, when the whole world pauses today to reflect and to remember that Jesus walked out of the tomb, that they found an empty tomb, while the whole world is reflecting on it. What better time could you find than to use this day to change your heart, be baptized into Christ with full faith and assurance that he'll forgive you and give you a path that leads straight to heaven? That's your opportunity. That's all of our opportunities today. Not to have a feeling of a grim story, of a sad story of Jesus' death, but today to feel the joy of a resurrection. You can do it. Why don't you do it as we stand and as we sing?